When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After he said this to him, "Follow me." This is the word of the Lord.
So this has been always a fun week, and it's fun for a couple of reasons. It's fun to be able to give my children back to the school district and say, please take care of these for a while. They're getting on my nerves. But then also here at the church, we get to welcome this whole new crew of 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds to our preschool. And as I've mentioned many times, the only thing I'm qualified to do at the preschool is to hold the door, so that's what I do. And the first couple days are really nice because everybody's right on time. Right? The drop-off window will increase as the semester goes on. But for that first day, everybody's right there, usually moms and dads, very excited to drop off their kiddos. And it's always really especially to watch it on our 3-year-old days. Because for these kids, this is the first time anything like this has happened, right? Like they're in preschool now. Before that, most of them have been home with mom and dad pretty much the whole time. And so it's always interesting to watch the 3-year-old drop off and figure out like who's going to handle it better, the kid or mom and dad. Most of the time, it's the kid. And the mom and dad are the ones that don't handle it all that well. And this year was not really any exception. There was a lot of, especially moms, I hate to stereotype, but especially moms kind of tearing up at the idea that little John or little Jane is starting this journey of school. And somehow, some way, they're old enough to do that now. And that moment, I no doubt, feels profound. And if you're a parent or a grandparent or know somebody who's been around kids, you know that moment feels profound, right? You're starting your kid on this journey of learning and education that's going to take, up to about 15 years at least. No doubt, no wonder it feels like emotional because it marks a transition in the life of that kid's life. And this tends to be a bit of an emotional moment, again, especially for our moms. My favorite move this year, though, was actually one of our dads who dropped off their little boy and figured out, I think, that maybe little boy wasn't going to handle the drop-off all that well, and dad got maybe a little bit concerned about it. So he looked at little boy and said, "Hey, don't forget to go say hi to so-and-so over there." And then when the kid's back was turned and started walking that way, he bolted. And he's like, if he doesn't see me leave, he won't remember I left. And I'm like, and I think that actually worked out pretty well. I don't recommend it, but it seemed to work for him. So we know that this moment, every year we come back to this time, and one of the nice things about preschool, it's a reminder of these times, but we also know, those of us here who are a little beyond our preschool years, know that that journey that they're beginning this week of education will eventually come to an end. Right? There'll be the other moment that goes along with this, which of course is like that graduation moment, that thing that you're hoping for yourself or your kids or your grandkids or whoever it is. There'll come this moment where the time where we dedicate so much of our life to learning, right? Receiving wisdom, receiving knowledge, learning skills, developing skills, all of those things that we do throughout, our educational years. There'll come a time when that period where we are the receivers of wisdom, the receivers of knowledge from others, there's going to come a time when that period will end. And while we'll always hopefully be learning, we'll always hopefully be growing, right? Our job will eventually switch as we grow older and age, and we stop being the ones that are predominantly receiving the knowledge and the wisdom, and we start to become the ones who are taking that knowledge and that wisdom that we have gained over the years and putting it into practice. Right? We are the ones sharing our knowledge and the wisdom, everything we've learned and figured out. And this can sometimes be a hard transition when people transition out of school life into work life. I've been watching my almost 20-year-old son make that transition. I think he's doing a good job. But it is one, right? There's that moment where we stop being the ones that are all predominantly spending our time receiving, and suddenly we become the ones who are expected to start giving. That is that graduation moment. That is the moment that is happening between Peter and Jesus, right? They had their kindergarten drop-off, preschool drop-off, beginning of all of this moment back at the beginning of this series when Jesus found Peter and his compatriots fishing by the side of the ocean. Right? And he invited them to come with them, right? Leave behind your parents, something that they probably hadn't done. They're probably in their teenage years. I don't think we mentioned that before, but we're probably, disciples are probably in their mid to late teenage years when Jesus comes to get them. But they have that preschool drop-off moment much later in life, but they have that moment where they're leaving behind their parents and they're going with Jesus to learn some things. And that's basically what they've been doing for the entirety of the gospel, is they have been traveling with Jesus and learning from Jesus the example he sets. They have heard him teach over and over and over again. They've seen the miracles that he has done. They themselves have performed some of those miracles. They've done a little student teaching, along the way, like you do. They've had times to practice putting what they've learned into practice. Jesus has sent them out to do those things, but most of the time has been spent hanging around, learning, and receiving from Jesus. Receiving the lessons of faith, the lessons of life, learning from his example, and learning from his way. And they have seen and been with Jesus through all of the events of the gospel. They've been with him now through the events of Good Friday. They've witnessed his crucifixion. They've seen him now come back to life. And that's when we arrive here at this time. Now, if you back up a little bit in what we read this morning, there's always a balance about how much I want to make the lay reader read, right? But if you actually back up the story just a little bit, you will see that it says at the beginning of the passage we read today that when they finished eating, right? So there's actually this is a smaller scene in a much longer moment between the disciples and Jesus. And the food that they just finished eating was breakfast, and it was breakfast that Jesus cooked for them, and he had prepared for them on the seashore because the disciples had actually gone back to fishing. And I always wonder what that moment must have been like for Jesus when he goes and encounters the disciples and he sees that they've gone back to where they started. Right? So Jesus once again finds them fishing on a fishing boat, likely because at that point they had no idea what else to do with themselves. Right? They had that kind of crisis moment, no doubt. They had been following Jesus. They had a certain expectation, and one of their expectations, no doubt, was that Jesus was always going to be there. Their teacher was always going to be with them, and that they were just going to continue to follow him. And then when, of course, all the events happen around Good Friday and Easter and all of that stuff transpires, they come to the shocking realization that no, Jesus isn't always going to be with them. They're not always just going to be following after him, that they are going to need to take on a different role. They are going to need to graduate to something else. And you can almost feel it in the scriptures when you read those moments that there's a little bit of a freak out that happens there. And so they go back to what it is that they knew how to do from before. They go back to fish. And so I wonder if Jesus had a little bit of a facepalm moment when he saw him out there doing that You're like, really, guys, you couldn't wait 3 days? 3 days! Just give me a moment. But Jesus finds them there, and he finds them fishing, and he does one of those things that he does where he causes them to have a miraculous catch, and that's when Peter recognizes, like, oh my gosh, that's not just some guy on the lake shore, that's Jesus. He's come back, and they run, and they have this last little exchange in John's gospel anyway, this last little exchange between them and Jesus, and it's over a plate of barbecue food because barbecue is holy. Sneak that one in there. And Peter and Jesus have this conversation, and here Jesus is making his final graduation speech and giving giving Peter his instructions, and they're very simple. He says to Peter, "Feed my sheep." Now, Jesus had talked about himself as the shepherd only a few chapters before to the disciples. Right before Jesus is taken away, he says, "I am the good shepherd. I am the one that the sheep actually listens to. I am the one that cares for the sheep to the point where I am willing to lay my own life down for them." And when Jesus talks about that, and when he says that, and when he talks about the sheep that he's willing to die for, he is talking about the very disciples that are in front of him at that moment. So at this moment, at this time, when Jesus says to Peter, "Feed my sheep," he's basically saying, you are the shepherd now. You are not the only sheep, and in fact, there are so many more. So many that no one person could possibly feed them all. So Peter, you need to feed your sheep, feed my sheep. And John, you need to do it, and Nathan, you need to do it, and all the other people that will follow in line afterwards are going to need to do it. It cannot be just about Jesus anymore if what God wants to happen, which is God's amazing message of grace and peace and comfort, God's kingdom is going to be built in all of the far-flung places, and if the message is going to go to all of the places that God wants it to go, it cannot simply be all about one person in one place anymore. It must go. There must be more shepherds. And so Jesus says to Peter, it's time. It's time that you become the shepherd. You have received so much, and he has. He's seen so much. He's learned so much from Jesus, and that's what he's been doing most of the time. And now it is Peter's turn to not simply be the one who receives or be the one that learns. It's Peter's turn to be the one that teaches, the one that shares. And Peter needs to do it. And then right after this passage, Jesus is going to turn to John and tell John very similar things. So Peter needs to go, and John needs to go, and Timothy needs to go, and they all need to go. They all need to become the shepherds Jesus needs them to be, and to share all the love, all the peace, all the knowledge, all the grace that they have received with others. That is why we get to be here, and why Christianity spreads as far as it does. It stops being about one person, though it will always be about Jesus. Of course it will. But it stops being about one individual in one place, but it starts to be about the message, the love, and the peace and the grace that individual came to bring, and it starts spreading through more and more and more as more and more people take up the mantle of shepherd in the way that Jesus originated. This is always an interesting time in the moment of any organization, in the moment of any movement, right? A lot of organizations, a lot of movements, a lot of things begin with a single person or maybe just a couple of people who have a vision, have a dream, have a message, right? And they gather people around them, right? And this happens, and we've seen this happen over and over and over again, both in Jesus' time and in our time today. But there's always this question of what happens when that person is no longer there that everything is built around. This is actually happening right now amongst a lot of different organizations, but there was one that I became familiar with a few years ago, and it's located down in Los Angeles, and it's called Homeboy Industries. It's an amazing ministry that was started by a Catholic priest, Father Boyle. And Father Boyle is well known in many circles, and he's well known because of the hard work he has done and the interesting ministry he was put into. Now, in the late 80s, Father Boyle was appointed to a Catholic parish in Los Angeles in a very economically depressed part of town. It was actually the poorest parish of all the parishes in Los Angeles. And when Father Boyle got there, he saw around him a lot of need. because this was the kind of late 80s, early 90s. It was the height of the gang crisis in Los Angeles, and he saw a lot of things around him that were not in the way that he knew they should be. He saw a lot of men entering, especially young men, entering lives of crime, feeling like they had no other choice. And instead of just sit back and watch and lament and complain about it, Father Boyle decided to do something about it. And he started to do outreach ministry with the young, especially the young men in his area who were in the process of being recruited into gangs. And he wanted to know why it was that they felt that was where they could go or where they should go. He wanted to know what their challenges were, and he wanted to learn how to address them. And he took this very practical approach to it. And he decided to look around and say, what do we already have here in our neighborhood? How can we already research ourselves? How can we do better behind these young people so they don't feel like this is their only option for somewhere to go and something to do? And through his church and through his parish, they began to set up very simple, very practical ministries. Right? They found out there was a huge need for childcare in their area, but nobody could afford it. So they started to offer childcare to people who need it. They started offering after-school tutoring programs to kids. They started opening up the doors of the church so the young people had somewhere to go other than standing on the street corners where they would get themselves into trouble. And over the years, the ministry started to grow and grow and grow as things and as needs got identified. They would look around and say, okay, how do we address this? One of the biggest needs that they discovered that they had that became one of their cornerstone ministries actually at the church and at Homeboy Industries itself is tattoo removal. Tattoos are a huge part of gang culture. It is a huge part of life. It's one of the ways that you mark yourself or others. And so when people, and it can be hard to leave a life and leave a community all on its own, but when you continue to carry the marks of that community with you, it is even harder. So while you wouldn't think of tattoo removal as necessarily a Christian mission, in his part of the world with the people he's working with, it very much is. And over the years, they've managed to grow and develop to meet the needs of the community they served. But as Father Boyle ages and gets older, there's this inevitable question of, well, wait a minute, what happens once you're gone? Can all of this continue when you're not here? Who's going to be the next person, the next individual that's going to come and be the center of this thing? And Father Boyle, over the years, has recognized that that's not what that ministry needs next. And he recognized that much like they have more resources around them than they thought they did, and they realized they could reorganize the people and the resources that were already there to serve the people who were there, he looked around the mission and the ministry they were doing. He's saying, no, the leadership we already need is already here. And so as they've grown and as they've matured, they haven't just been serving the people in those communities, but people who have come through their ministries, people who have exited gang life or other similar challenges, don't just simply come and receive and leave. Some of them stay, and many of them have become the leaders of the ministry today. So many of the people, if you visit Homeboy's Ministries today, who are in very important positions of leadership in many of their various ministries, will tell you that they started as somebody walking through the door in need of some support, in need of some care. They started on the receiving end. But by the time they had been loved so well by this group and received so well, so much from this group of people who loved and cared for them, that they became the people who also now give. They now give back to that ministry, and many of them will tell you they probably give back more than they feel they ever have received. Jesus wants his ministry that he began with those disciples to continue. He wants it to spread far and wide. And the only way that he knows that will happen is if those who are around him, who have learned and received so much from him, become the ones who share and give and help others learn what they have learned. And because Jesus recognizes that and he empowers and he equips Peter, even though there's no doubt Peter does not probably yet feel ready. He's only a few years into this. How could he possibly be ready to go? He knows, Peter knows that he's not perfect yet, just like John knows, just like Mary knows, just like everyone else who will continue to move this message forward. They know that they are not as perfect as they can be, and they are certainly not as perfect as Jesus is. But Jesus says to Peter anyway, feed my sheep. Jesus says to Peter anyway, a second time, feed my sheep. And just to make sure that Peter really, really gets it, he says a third time to Peter, feed my sheep. We have all been blessed in life to receive so much from others. We've all been blessed in life to have teachers and pastors and parents and mentors come alongside us and learn and help us learn and help us grow and help us develop into the people we are today. We should be grateful for all of those folks. And one of the ways that we show our gratitude for everybody who taught us and helped us learn and develop throughout our lives, we show our gratitude by asking the question, who needs to receive from me? Where do I need to share? Where can I help someone else learn? Where can I walk in a way like Jesus walked and invite others to walk with me? We have all received. We are blessed to receive. God wants us to receive. God also wants us to share. Amen.